My name is Brandon Reimchen. I'm the head of department here at CD Spectrum for concept art and illustration. And Tyler, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Tyler James, and I'm a mentor at the school in the same department. I teach concept art and illustration, and I've just been a game artist for a long time now. So hopefully, be able to add some interesting thoughts to the conversation.
Excellent. Okay, so yes, this is a trends and techniques in concept art. We're going to be just chatting about some of the things in terms of hardware, software, things that we might see in the future for concept art, things that are happening now, trends that may disappear, things that might stick around. So we'll get to that in a second here. So just quickly about CG Spectrum, we're global top ranked online school, providing specialized programs in animation, digital painting, game development, 3D modeling, VFX, virtual production, 3D viz, all of the things,
It's a mouthful.
all of the interesting things. And we educate creators through personalized mentorship from industry experts. So you get to learn from people like myself and Tyler who have been doing it for quite a while now. Yeah, I never want to think about how long it's been because it makes me feel old, but that means
Yeah,
we've got a lot of experience, right? So,
yeah. Don't think
um,
about it too much.
so yeah, the 170 plus film and game industry mentors, 80% job success rate. We have career development services and a huge community, which is, I think, one of our best aspects. So you can see here just a range. We're going to be obviously talking about concept art. And you see us over there in the digital painting section. But we have those other courses as mentioned, and you can see sort of a breakdown within, say, visual effects, game dev, animation, and visualization. So
I think all
if you
that
have,
stuff there is also student work, if I'm not mistaken.
yes, it is. Yeah. It's we've got some great students coming through and alumni as well that have gone through. And so definitely people are having a good time and developing some pretty awesome personal work. And so just a kind of snapshot of studying with CG Spectrum, what that looks like. We have a 3-month concept art essentials course that you can sign up for. We have, and that can be a part of a longer foundations program that you can move on to, which is 6 months and get a certification for our foundations program overall. And then you can move on to our concept artist specialization or digital illustrator specialization, where it's a 3-term, 9-month course each, depending on which track you go. And you can opt for, aiming to become a concept artist
You
or an
could
illustrator.
also take both if you'd like, back to
And
back
you
if
can,
you're,
yeah,
yeah.
if you really want to round out your skills, you can take both. So there's some good offerings there.
Never hurts
Uh,
to just know more.
yeah, I mean, I would have done this back in the day for sure. I would have been in love with the idea that there was something that could teach me all of those things. So, yeah, here's just a little bit more about me. I've got a degree in fine arts, 20 years in the video game industry. I've done work for EA, Activision, Microsoft, Disney Interactive, and Capcom, as well as others. But those are some of the major players in there. And there's some of the titles that I've worked on, and there's a lot of titles out there that are in development or that were in development. And so concept artists do a lot of the background work, even if the project doesn't see the light of day. So and Tyler can attest to that for sure.
Oh yeah, I forgot you worked on Prototype. That's so cool. If I remember right, when Prototype came out, I think there was like another game that came out at the same time that was kind of similar.
Yeah, and it was from yes, yeah, I can't remember the name of it, but they were very similar, sort of city-based
Yeah, open world, like
games.
kind of
Yeah,
like urban sci-fi. Yeah, gosh, I wish I could remember the name of that, but
yeah.
yeah, it was a good time in
I'll
games.
try and remember. Yeah. So tell us about yourself,
Well, you got
Tyler.
the slide there. So I've been working for, I think it's probably like 18 years or something now, and in games, doing concept art. I did a lot of 3D stuff for years, and also served as art director for a digital card game 4 years, and then I did some other art direction after that. And currently, of course, I'm a mentor at the school and also continue to work with various clients on a contract basis. And so you might have seen some of my work in products from Blizzard, IPs related to Warhammer,
Mm.
helped out with some Supergiant stuff on Hades, and yeah, just a smattering of things. Impossible to list everything, but those are just a couple highlights.
Good stuff. All right. So this is going to be the slide that we hold on for a while. We're going to talk through sort of each one of these sections. We've got some of our own notes on this, so we'll be reading from those just to give you guys a view into, things like trends in software, hardware, and up and coming trends and things to think about there. So we are going to start with software, and it might be no surprise to anyone that Photoshop for a concept artist tends to be the industry standard for concept art. Not to say that there aren't there's studios out there that are using, say, Clip Studio or Krita or whatever they're using. There are other options out there. It's just that Photoshop's been around the longest. A lot of these other programs have been built off the back of Photoshop, and so that's why we talk about it that way. And it's a modest monthly subscription for Photoshop, just in terms of getting, attaining it. And it used to cost a lot more money. You'd have to kind of buy it outright every other year, every year. So the subscription model is nice, but it is a subscription model, so something to think about
And I
versus.
think wasn't there some controversy about Clip Studio or one of those other ones? They switched to a submodel, or they tried to, and then people were
Mm,
angry, and I forget what that was about. But
yeah,
a lot of these other offerings, they're sort of the way that they catch people's interest is because they are less expensive, and so
yeah,
when they try to squeeze a little more out of their users, I think that can
yeah.
really stir things up quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think in terms of, if you're curious, like, oh, do I have to use Photoshop to be digitally painting with anything? The answer is no, you don't have to. You can use Clip Studio. Procreate's come on the scene via Apple and iPad with the Apple Pencil. I love drawing in Procreate, but it does lack some of the functionality that you'll get in Photoshop layer control. And then even Clip Studio and things like Krita, other programs, they lack the depth of Photoshop's functionality. I'm definitely not a fanboy of Adobe. So as soon as these other options come up with a solution that's similar, I mean, I think you'd see people migrate away from Photoshop if the price isn't right, if it's not being competitive, or if it's buggy, because I mean, that's one of the things that Tyler, I think you can talk about the updates
Oh
for
yeah.
Photoshop.
Oh, I'm just gonna recommend everybody be cautious about auto updates, because I'm sure some of you have noticed that you'll get a fresh version, and the features that you think are going to be awesome just make everything very unstable. And so I
Yeah,
usually have auto updates disabled for my software, and in particular Photoshop. I tend to
yeah.
just leave it alone. I mean, I used to use what was it, CS? I guess it was CS6.
CS6?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
used to use
yeah,
that for forever, years and
yeah.
years and years. Way after they moved on from that,
Very
and I
stable
just
version. Yeah,
it was really really great.
yeah,
And the only reason I migrated away was because eventually all of the other aspects of my computer became incompatible, like graphics
yeah,
drivers and Windows, and just everything else was sort of
yeah.
fighting against this ancient version of Photoshop. So I had to upgrade, and it was painful. It took me a while to find which new version of Photoshop I felt comfortable with. And then once I
Yeah,
found it, I was like, all right, updates off. We're going to live with this one as long as we possibly can. And
Yeah.
sure, maybe I don't catch all of the new fanciest tools, but honestly, I don't really need that stuff to function as a
Well, I think
professional.
that's a good point is like with Photoshop, you don't need to use a lot of what it's able to do, right? It's not necessarily a drawing and painting program, and because of that, sometimes it can be frustrating when you want to do certain things, and that's why I think people have migrated over to something like Clip Studio, where it's made for illustrators and artists. But yeah, it can seem overwhelming to use that, and we're going to be talking about programs like Blender and ZBrush as well, where the same is true, where you can do a lot of different things in those programs, but you don't have to for what we're after in concept art, right? And so,
Yeah, we're just sort of touching the surface. And so,
yeah,
for that reason, I think it's not really necessary for you to be always on the latest version.
yeah, exactly.
Let some folks that are maybe not having as much pressure on them to deliver things on time
Yeah,
test those features out. I don't
you
know what's
certainly
going on with
do.
the,
Yeah, you
and you
learn
do, right? Yeah. And I
to
think
not do
it's
that.
an
Yeah,
open
not update.
question of, what's the Adobe testing crew doing? Is there a testing crew? I have to assume there is, but they seem to miss stuff quite often, and it's
Yeah,
a little mysterious for me. So hopefully they can continue to improve their process and
yeah.
make the users feel a little bit less like beta testers in that. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think one of the things I was testing a while back was cross compatibility between Clip Studio and Photoshop, and the reason I was testing it is because Clip Studio has very recently added a liquefy multiple layers option, which is sorely missing from Photoshop. Like it's crazy to
mhm.
me that it doesn't have the ability for you to liquefy multiple layers.
Yeah,
So I thought, okay, well, let's go into Clip Studio. Let's see if we can just shift those PSDs between the two seamlessly, and I can just go into Clip Studio for that one feature. But
yeah,
unfortunately, a lot of the layer structure breaks between the two
yeah.
programs. So they're really quite incompatible. And generally, with the students in my classes, I'll usually tell them, feel free to use some of this other software for some of the lighter, earlier steps of your process. But as soon as your
Yeah.
file gets more dense, you're having a more layered process. It's usually safer for you to use the software that your client is using, that your client's studio is using, so that there's nothing weird going on there.
Which tends to be Photoshop for the reasons that you'll also get, say, modelers using it for texturing, and the other disciplines will use Photoshop over, say, Clip Studio for their own reasons, and that's why a studio might have a certain number of licenses for their staff, and so it can be that you have to use Photoshop in Studio, which has been the problem, or not the problem, but has been the case at various studios that I've worked at as well. So it's kind of a necessity in certain cases, and but it you can in you could work in. I have worked in Procreate for my sketching, and then I've transferred that to Photoshop. So if you have a particular way, it's not unusual for concept artists to maybe start their work, or like you're saying, use certain tools if it can be compatible enough to switch between them. So
I feel like that's a
yeah,
good segue to Blender because one of the things, like I said, I did 3D for years, and it was always a question of what 3D software does this studio want to use? Is it 3D Studio Max? Is it Maya? Is it Softimage? Whatever. I mean, some of those things are a little less prevalent now. Blender, I think, is because it's free, is attempting to create some sort of unity, but yeah, I don't know. I think it's a really really great tool, but I
mhm.
don't know how much it's penetrated into actual like studio pipelines at this point.
Yeah, I've heard from our modeling mentors and our head of department of modeling here at CG Spectrum that now that they're hiring younger people, they're all trained on Blender and not on these old packages. So I think we're starting to see the shift towards that now that because Blender back in the day really didn't have the functionality that, say, Maya did, Max did, 3D Studio Max, Autodesk. But it's getting there, right?
It
I
was
think they're
abysmal at first. I remember trying it
right.
early on, and it
Yeah.
was like I and it could be I was just unfamiliar at that point, but I remember that each time you wanted to translate an object, you had to hit the enter key to confirm that you wanted to accept that. So it's like, okay,
Oh
I'm going to move
wow,
this object over
that
here.
was
Okay, and
slow.
hit enter to confirm, rotate,
Yeah.
enter to confirm. It was like, what is going on
Yeah.
here? It was insanity. Obviously, it's come a long way.
Yeah, concept artists use it. I mean, I think the fact that it is free, especially for concept artists, where we do use it, in some case, some artists don't use it, some do, but it can be a really nice visual aid tool for you to work out scene, perspective, lighting, get a general sense of something, and use it even as paint over material. So. Yeah, it's just that up the updates, because it is always getting updated, and this is true of any program, that some of the workflows may be affected by updates where they change a button or move a menu, right? And so you just have to get used to that kind of thing. It
It's a
does have,
challenge with our actually creating content for classes because
oh yeah, for
we
sure.
obviously will create stuff, right, and then something
They'll change it.
moves, and then the students are like, wait, the
Yeah,
button's not there anymore. So you just
yeah,
have to try and be on top of stuff, and it's a little
yeah.
bit of a challenge, but I guess I appreciate that they're constantly trying to improve things.
Yeah, and it does have it's getting better, and it has sculpting ability now. It's from yourself, Tyler, and some of the modeling mentors once again from CD Spectrum. It doesn't have the ability yet of something like ZBrush, which is the next thing we're going to talk about. And so the difference though with ZBrush is that there's a larger subscription fee there, and everything costs money, except for Blender in this case. So it's something to think about, but it is really, I would say, the industry standard in sculpting. Um,
Yeah,
what are your
Blender
thoughts on
isn't
that?
isn't quite there yet. I think for me, it's definitely the robustness of the tools in ZBrush. It's the tablet centric
Hmm.
workflow, the pen centric workflow. It's obviously been built from the ground up as a tablet based software. So it's really ergonomic and it's just very
Yeah.
fluid in that way. I think it's a little jarring for people new to it because it is unique. But once you
Hmm.
get the hang of it, you start to realize why it's just so great.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
and Blender just doesn't have that yet, but it's getting there. I think
Yeah.
it's trying to
In
catch up.
time.
But yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
mean
think in
ZBrush has
time.
had a huge head start on him.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, I've used it, and I'm not. I didn't go through the same sort of career pathway as Tyler did, so I'm newer to 3D. But I can say, a lot of my history as an artist has incorporated sculpting with physical media like soapstone or Sculpey. It was one of my favorite things for making things.
Hey
And
man, that stuff's legit. That's
well, it's super fun. It's tactile, and and I think that's what ZBrush is for me, is it feels like I'm molding clay rather than something like a discrete modeling package, maybe like Maya, where I have to do more technical things to get a shape to look the way I want it to look. And so I absolutely love sculpting in ZBrush for that reason. Is it I feel, well, it was made for artists, right? Not necessarily just 3D visualization. And so I think that it's approachable in that way. There is a bit of a learning curve to understand its tools, but I think once you've got it, you can get started really quick with it. So it's a big part of workflow for a lot of concept artists now. Yeah. So.
yeah, and just being able to create quick armatures with the Z
Mhm.
spheres is nice. Like if you want to create a quick reference for your illustration or something, and you're doing a weird creature, you can't find reference for that. Okay, well then maybe you just create a quick centaur armature or a weird,
Mhm.
squid monster armature, right? And then you can pop it in Blender and render it real quick. I mean, it's just everything is so accessible. So it's just really nice.
Yeah, no, I like it. I think the biggest downside is the cost, but there are some options out there for students, and there are options for like base level ZBrush Core. Like you can play with it a little bit at a way reduced cost if you're interested in looking into it. So
Do they still
it's
have Core Mini? I know that that was a thing for a while, but I don't know if they still do that.
Since Maxon purchased it from Pixelogic, I'm not sure if they've changed that, but it's definitely good to go and look to see what they have because generally, back in the day, you could even demo the package. They do make an effort to allow for people to try it out. Like I was saying, at least at a reduced cost, if not free, because ZBrush Core Mini used to be free. Um, but yeah, I'd take a look. There are other packages out there like Mudbox. There are packages on iOS like what's it called, Forger and Nomad. Those are, I mean, obviously you have to pay for those, but there's some options as well if you want to get into a similar style of sculpt. You can transfer a lot of the qualities of those programs into something like ZBrush, so that can also be a pathway to work from. Yeah. Um, and so I think we'll move on from this. Just the last honorable mention in the set is PureRef. PureRef, not everybody uses PureRef, but PureRef is a reference software where you can drag and drop images and put them on an infinite canvas and save that out as a singular file for any of your concept art needs, right? So if you're doing a piece that you have a ton of reference for, it's a fantastic bit of software. The alternative before was obviously you maybe a folder on your computer where you're looking through the Windows viewer or in what's it called on Apple? The
I'm not an Apple guy. I
search.
don't know.
Yeah, I'm not either. The you people out there will know. But basically looking through the folder structure. Finder, thank you.
Oh, there we go.
Um, and yeah, so that can work. Photoshop can work. You drop all these images into a Photoshop file, but it does start to chew away at your system resources if you do that. That's how I used to do it. And now not having Photoshop compete with your current piece of artwork and the file full of all your imagery, which can get actually quite big. You can put all those things into PureRef. It is donation based. You can donate $0 and still get it. And so if you're interested, check it out. It's a really good piece of kit, and you can send things as long as the other person has PureRef. You can send a singular file, and they'll have all of your reference laid out the way you laid it out, right? And so in a production environment, that can actually be quite good because say you send your work to a modeler, you can send this file with it, and they can see all the reference you've been using. So
If I could just add one more software honorable
sure.
mention, Adobe Bridge is a tool I
Yes.
like. And if you have a Photoshop subscription, then you can go and get it through the Creative Cloud for free. And it's also just a file browser. But what's nice about Bridge is that it allows you to preview PSD files.
And organize, I think, like organize your searching. It is better than just looking through Windows because it'll
Yeah.
also index your files if you set it up properly. And yeah, you'll be able to preview everything, which is fantastic. So good mention. Let's move on to hardware here. So a lot of people are going to already know that there's digitizers, and underneath that, that's like a Cintiq, right? Or there's competing brands to Wacom, however you want to say it. Zens, Huion, XP Pen are some of the other contenders, which is nice to have because now there's actually competition. There didn't used to be. So you were stuck buying Wacom products, which can be quite expensive, to be honest, right? So it's great that there's competition out there. Um, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think Wacom is definitely the priciest. Um, some of that I think is because they were the only players in the game for a long time and they could just
Yeah.
sort of set the price themselves. Uh, but I think there's a little bit of like software quality or driver quality that comes with that. I've
Hmm.
heard there's just not quite the same level of quality with some of the driver compatibility and stuff with the other brands, but they're getting there. And I think it's at this point worth it to shop around. You know, if the difference
Totally.
between you having a digitizer and not is the slightly budget version from, Huion or however you say that, then by all means go for it. I think that they're really quite
So
good these days.
yeah.
Um, I'm sort of in like the Wacom ecosystem because I use the EK remote and I've got all these
Yeah.
weird hotkeys and stuff set up. So I'm kind of in that
Yeah.
ecosystem. But I think if you're somebody who isn't invested in that, then you just have a wider range of options
Yeah.
today, which is really great.
There's the remote for people interested.
Oh
It's
yeah, love it. I bought three of them because I'm a weirdo and I'm worried they're gonna discontinue them. So
it's a good call. Sometimes they do that, right? And that's the problem is you can get so used to your hotkeys being transferred to something like that, and then they stop making it, right? It's like,
yeah,
oh.
yeah. I
There
will
are
say that the
actually
one
some
I have,
options for
it's
that.
the it's the first one that I've got, and I've had
Hmm.
it this whole time. And aside from the little rubber plate becoming a little dislodged, it's
Right.
holding up just fine. I've never
Yep.
had any issues with the wireless connectivity. The buttons work great.
Yep.
It's built well. Like it's got
Hmm.
some weight to it, and it's constructed nicely. So
Yeah.
yeah, hopefully I'll just be able to continue using this for a really long time, and I don't have to crack open my backup versions.
Yeah, so I mean, like they come in all shapes and sizes. I have, and I'm not showing off here, but I just over the years I've collected a lot of them, and I have a 32-inch Pro. I have a companion 16, a companion 13, and I do have a smaller bamboo tablet. And the reason, and I used to have a 21 UX, but I gave that away. But the reason I have them, I prefer drawing on the screen, and so those for me are really good options. But I do have the little tablet, which is our kind of next point there. That is just a little bit less unwieldy because the bigger your screen is, obviously, it takes up a ton of room on your desk. And while that sounds like a good idea, it can actually be cumbersome. And so we'll talk about monitor arms in that regard. But I think moving on to tablets where you are drawing on the desk, looking up at a screen, is a really easy way to save on space. But it just depends on the individual. I've worked with people that cannot stand drawing on the screen. They prefer the tablet. So the
That's me.
Intuos. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
And so it's whatever you want. If you are used to drawing on a tablet, great. I think the only difference there is if you're used to, and that's maybe my problem, is I could never move to drawing here and looking there. It would always felt weird. I just didn't practice it enough ultimately. But yeah, it's as soon as you learn how to do it, then your pen's not in the way, which is really nice. But
yeah.
what?
I got used to that. It's just nice. Also, the ergonomics I think are just easier to
Oh
solve,
yeah,
like you said, in terms of posture and stuff, which we'll get into with the monitor arms. But when you're using
yeah,
a regular tablet, it's just
yeah.
down there on the desk. You can just be in whatever sort of relaxed position you want to be in your chair.
You can take them
And
anywhere as well. I can't take my
sure,
32-inch Cintiq. The thing weighs a ton.
yep,
So
yep. I
yeah,
remember in college always having my Intuos under my arm going to class.
yeah,
And
nice.
yeah, that was sort of when I sort of just, that was like training mode for me to learn how to draw
Yeah,
not directly on the screen because those didn't even exist back then.
yeah.
And
I
so I
remember
just was
buying
kind
the
of
old
stuck doing
serial
that.
port ones.
Yeah, I had one
Yeah,
of those purple Intuos. I think it was the
yeah,
Intuos 2. And those were workhorses, man. Like
yeah.
I would be walking in the rain in those
Mm,
things, and I mean it all just kept working.
yeah.
I
No,
at
they're
some point I had to put some tape on it because it was like coming apart, and yeah,
no,
it
they're
was
they're
good times.
awesome and they're cheaper, right? And you can get into digital painting really easily by going the route of a tablet versus something as expensive. Because they say the 32-inch Cintiq is prohibitively expensive. To be honest, it's a lot of money for
It's
what it
priced
does.
more for a studio than for an individual,
Yeah,
honestly.
or if you're a professional, you know your workflow, you know what you need, and that's a little bit better. So I think if you're curious about this and if you're looking at buying them, I'd say, look at the competitors like you've said, Tyler, because you do the same artwork. I mean, the panels on Cintiqs aren't even that amazing. So I always look for a good second monitor that has the right color profiles and accurate colors to test my work on anyway, right? So it's a case of you can absolutely get into this at different levels depending on what your budget is. So
And I think
um,
also, just as a reminder for everybody, is to remember to write off expenses on your taxes, right? Like these big
yeah,
purchases
they're
are
work
worth it.
tools. Yeah,
Yeah, keep track of this stuff. For me, I have like a specific card that I use for all of my business related purchases. So when I'm filing, I just open up the sheet. It's like, okay, here's all the stuff I bought on this card,
yeah.
and then I just put them in categories, and it's really easy.
Accountants love that. Yeah,
They do.
yeah.
Well, in my case, my tax person requires I do it,
Yes,
but yeah,
so does my
um,
accountant. So it's
yeah,
just
yeah.
like,
They're like,
yeah,
I'm not gonna fill out this profit loss or this expense
yeah,
report unless you've got this organized for me. But I mean,
yeah.
I think we probably have quite a few younger people watching, and you may not be thinking a whole lot about the complexities of taxes, but these big purchases, definitely think about that stuff because it,
Yep.
it can really add up.
It can save you money, yeah, by the end. So,
Another thing, real
um,
quick, to mention on the non-screen based tablets is I actually recommend. Let me grab it here. I have this thing here, and this is I guess it's like a tablet, like an iPad stand, or
mhm,
it's a stand for a laptop. I guess it's a
yeah.
metal. It's really sturdy. It's metal, and all it is it's just a little hinged thing. And I put my tablet on this, and what
Oh,
it does is it
nice.
allows me to angle it at the perfect angle because when the tablet is flat on your desk,
Yeah,
that can
you have
actually
to
put a
like
little bit of strength. Yeah, it kind of
turn your hand
it's
out.
nice for you to be able to just dial that in really precisely because again, you're probably going to be sitting there painting for like 2 hours, right? So
Mhm,
just
yeah.
really get that angle precise. And these things you can get this for like 20 bucks on Amazon or something, so not too crazy at all.
Yeah, that's perfect because the next little point here that we'll go through pretty quickly is monitor arms or stands, right? So my 32-inch Cintiq Wacom provides, or you can buy a stand that is the heaviest piece of equipment I've ever owned because the Cintiq's heavy. It does take up a lot of room, and you have to slide it in and out of the way. It's not fantastic, we'll just say. And
Yeah.
I've been testing for a company called Zoot, XOOT, a monitor arm, which they actually make for Wacom and the competitors for their screen digitizers. What it is an arm that you can move it in and out on your desk, but it also has two little feet on it, so it doesn't bounce. Because a lot of arms, Wacom even has its own arm. It's really nice to put your Cintiq or your tablet away when you're doing other work. When you move it out, what can happen when you're painting is the whole thing bounces on the arm unless you put some sort of stopper underneath it. So Zoot they've produced a really cool system where it has feet that stops it from bouncing and you can move it in and out. It's a really awesome system. And it has little pneumatic, I think I'm getting that right, uh, switches on the side that you just touch and it pulls it down into your lap and back up. So I invite you if you're interested. It's not cheap, but it is an awesome solution for if you're like me and you use a screen a digitizer to move that in the way. You can use an arm. You can certainly use the stuff provided by Ergotron is a company that does monitor arms. And they use the Visa mount, which if you don't know what that is, it's a uniform mount between TVs and monitors and digitizers. You can do that. They have other stands. Typically, they come with basic stands, so you're not going to be not able to paint. You'll be able to do that even out of the box, but it's something to look for. And I think just in general, like a good chair, stand-up desks are good to get the blood flowing. We do a lot of sitting. It's a very sedentary job. And that can over time produce health problems, right? So it's good to kind of think about your ergonomics, like Tyler was saying. It's like it can just even having your tablet flat on your desk makes your wrist move out the further you get away from your body.
You'll
And
start getting weird shoulder pain and stuff. On terms of seats,
yeah.
I'll throw out a recommendation for the Purple cushion. Purple's the brand,
Mm.
not sponsored, but they have this really specific type of material that they're using that's not
Mm.
foam. It's not
Yeah.
stuff that just like, deflates and flattens and disintegrates over time.
Yeah.
It's actually like I don't know, like a hex it's a rubberized hex grid thing. I don't know. It's some cool tech, but it is excellent.
Hmm.
I've tried maybe, 15 different types of,
Yeah.
seats, cushions and things like that. And Purple has been way better, like significantly better than all the other ones. So if
Yeah.
anyone just wants to sort of like skip all of the, testing $10 cheap stuff off Amazon and just go
Yeah.
right to the solution, just go right for a Purple. It's definitely going to be the best.
Yeah, and outside of that, if you're going to get a chair, I have a Herman Miller, and they're definitely not cheap chairs, but I've had this Herman Miller chair since 2010. And the only thing that's wrong with it is that the arm pads are starting to get so thin because I've been scrubbing my elbows on them for, 14 years. But it's still intact, and it is an expensive chair, but if you're gonna be sitting for long periods of time every day, it's a good call to get something that's not gonna, after a couple of years cost you that much in a chair again and then again and again and be uncomfortable, right? And so you want to be making sure that whatever you're doing is you're prioritizing your health with whatever ergonomic situation that you have. So yeah, just really quickly we move on because I want to get to the fads and what's here to stay. Um, but just iPad has come on the scene. Tablets have come on the scene in terms of mobile OS tablets. And with the Apple Pencil, and there's, Samsung has their own thing. A lot of other companies have their own thing. They're getting way better. I use the iPad with Procreate to do a lot of my drawing just because I'd like to not be at my computer full time. And that can be something that works in a way, but it certainly doesn't have the full functionality of something that you'd find on Photoshop or regular Apple OS. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, there's lots of options out there. It just depends on what you're doing. Like I said, with all of all the software out there, it will depend on, maybe it doesn't work on the iPad necessarily. But there are those things coming out. And who knows, in the future, they might get better. Things like Procreate might get more functionality. The more sort of RAM and processing power that these things get. And I've seen it even over the last few iterations of the iPad. You used to only be able to have 7 layers at a high res. Now you can have 100 layers at high res.
Yeah. What a
Um,
joke.
I know, right? So it's out there, it's getting better.
One
But
of the issues I have, the reason I
downsides for
haven't
sure.
fully adopted iPad is because I'm such a hotkey based artist.
Yeah,
And when I just, yeah, it's just weird for me. Like even just switching between brush and eraser
yeah. It's a
in
bit
Procreate
clumsy
is
if you're
just,
used to that.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
the whole like, there's no tactility to it.
yeah.
What I'm really looking for is they have a lot of these little wireless keypads you can pair with your iPad, but the issue for me is that I want to be able to hold the iPad with my offhand, right? Like, well, I guess
Mhm.
if you're like on the couch or something, right, you want to kind of be able to hold it with one hand and then draw with the other.
Yeah.
And as soon as you have a floating keypad, then now right, that tablet has to be supported in some other way, and it just doesn't feel as portable. So what I'd like somebody to do is to create a like a grip controller, so something
Hmm.
that would clip onto the side so you could hold it, and that holder would have almost like a console controller set of buttons, and you don't need a whole lot because you could do something like Maya marking menus. Let's say you've got 4 face buttons like on a PlayStation controller, right? You have, whatever the 4 front buttons are, you'd have them on the top. You could do them all
Yeah.
with your thumb, and then you push and hold them, and it could trigger some marking menu on the screen. And of course, you've got your pen. You can sort of flick maybe to all kinds of different commands and gestures and
Hmm.
stuff. And that's kind of what I do with the EK remote with their radial menus when
Yeah.
I'm here in Photoshop. it's a little weird to me that no one has thought of that. Like
I'm
everybody
surprised
keep,
Wacom hasn't just made the EK remote work on iPad, but it would kind of render their equipment useless if people switched
yeah.
over, right? So,
I think I'm really
um,
looking for that solution that's the combination
yeah.
controller and grip. I think
Yeah, there's a
that's the
really
magic.
ugly version of that. There's like it's got like a little wheel on it and a dial and a couple buttons. I can't remember what it's called, but there is one out there. I'm not sure if it has functionality for Mac or
You
Apple.
see some of that stuff in the like mobile gaming space where
Yeah,
they'll, it's like you can put your phone in this thing and then you clip it in and it's
yeah,
kind of
the
like a game
backbone.
controller.
Yeah,
But they don't typically fit in like an iPad, especially like an
yeah.
iPad Pro. And they're just not really designed to be working with things like Procreate. So
Mhm.
I'm sending this out into the YouTube sphere to hopefully reach someone who can make that happen.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's move on. We're going to talk about fads versus what's here to stay. So the main thing we're going to talk about here, which can be a contentious issue, which we're not going to get into the contentious side of things. There'll be a link provided and talking about this, but AI. Okay. And I've done a whole separate talk about AI, the pros and cons about it. Obviously, that landscape's changing by the day, but it's still at this point, it's still very much the same issues and same considerations. I would say so. That link will be provided. But let's talk about AI as a fad. And is it here to stay? I would say it's not going away. We're not magically going to wake up and AI has just been outlawed. Certainly, things may change legally in terms of how it works, but let's just talk about it as though it is a tool that we can use as concept artists. And what I would say is it can actually be, as long as the art is ethically sourced, a great tool for reference, right? What we do right now for reference gather typically is you'll go on to a website of some sort wherever there's images. It might be Google Images, it could be a photography website or a reference like a Getty or 123ref. It might be Pinterest. It could be anything in there. And you'd gather reference of pictures that support where you're going with your project. And so in this case, with an ethical AI model, you might be able to just input that search information as though it's a prompt, and then you might start getting results that are maybe usable and maybe not. I've used it just personally to see what it's about. I've used it in certain work situations in a limited fashion. And it has provided some utility. What I would say about it is that it doesn't replace artistic know-how. And so without getting once again into the politics of it, because it's still fresh and it's a bit of a Wild West situation with it, just as a tool, there can be some utility for sure. What are your thoughts on that, Tyler?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the whole ethically sourced part is the sticking point for me. It's the ones that are supposedly getting their data set from like ethically sourced places don't work as well, right? It's like, okay, that
Yeah,
makes sense, right? They're not,
they haven't scraped the entire
yeah,
internet.
they haven't
Yeah,
scraped
yeah,
all of the great art, so of course it's not going to look as good. And so,
yeah.
it's for me, it's still kind of just locked behind this morality issue. But I do agree that when it's if it's done correctly,
Mm,
it is a cool way to just get ideas.
yeah,
To just spark thoughts and just create mood boards and things like that. So
I
I
think
think that
so. Yep.
ultimately, when we get a version that is, kind of checks the boxes
Legitimate.
for me, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, then I think
yeah.
we can see that happening, in a way that I could feel okay about. Um, but it's really, I think, important to not just look at the end results when it comes
Hmm.
to that stuff, right? Like everybody sees just the final picture and they go, "Oh my gosh, this thing is amazing! It can make the picture
Yeah.
look perfect, and it's way better than me." But what you don't see is the process, and you don't see, how true is that to the vision of the artist, or how can that be
Or the
applied in the
client.
production?
Yeah.
yeah, a client, or what happens when you need to show multiple views of something. I mean, there's just all of this complexity that's introduced in an actual creative production versus
Yeah.
something that is solely focused on an end result and
Hmm.
not knowing the intent of at the beginning of
Yeah.
that creator. So I think through that lens, it tends to um, cause people to sort of
Yeah.
overestimate its
I think
value.
that's it. It's overestimation of its ability, I think, and to elaborate a little bit more on what you're saying is what's happening with the layperson using this stuff is that they'll type in some generic terms and they'll get results, like you're saying. But that doesn't, and a concept artist will feel this in the job, not relating to AI art, but to working with clients right away, is that what your concept of what they want is versus what they actually want, right? You have to work through and do a ton of iterations and tweaks to your process to get the visuals to look the way they want them to look. Whereas AI doesn't promise that. AI just promises to produce a thing, right? Which may vaguely be in the general direction, but you'll still have to home in on what that is. So for the person that's using it that doesn't can't draw or isn't experienced in creative endeavors like concept art is they won't know what to do with that when the client comes back to them with feedback, right? That if this isn't the right direction, you can keep hammering those prompts, but you not are not necessarily going to get any closer. And so, I think that it's something to think about for those of you that are here or those of you that are watching, that it is absolutely not a silver bullet for visualization and creativity. It's not to say that there's people out there that can't draw and paint, don't have any sort of artistic background, that aren't entirely happy with what it produces, but that's idiosyncratic. That's them being happy. It's not them working towards an art direction. I've used it, for instance, to try and just create reference for myself, and it's been quite frustrating to because I know what my vision is. It's been quite frustrating to get to even with negative prompting, positive prompting, all of the things that everybody does now. It's been really frustrating to get the results I want as somebody that knows what they're doing, right? So you can imagine as somebody that doesn't know what they're doing, but are enamored with this novel output, that they might have the wrong idea on how things work, right? And I think that's good to illustrate for uh, students, potential students for CG Spectrum, anybody that's listening, is that it's not ever going to replace the creativity of the individual, and the know-how is a big part of it. You won't know if your lighting's bad. You won't know if the pose isn't correct
Or you
or
won't catch
whatever.
that thumb is facing the wrong way on that hand, or
Yeah, and those things may get better in time. In fact, they probably
sure.
will get better, but it still will not be easier to then just speak to somebody and get them to work if they're a good artist who's practiced, right?
Well, I
And
mean, also
so,
just at the end of the day, where's the personal satisfaction in just having a robot
yeah.
make some garbage? It's
Well,
just
and I
like
think
it's
what you're
just
going to see is you're going to
hollow.
see audiences eventually. I mean, it's already a case where these AI models are consuming, even though they've got checks and balances to not do this, but they're consuming their own output, which is going to create a monoculture of what it can output, right? And there's Glaze is something you want to talk about, Glaze?
I would love to mention Glaze. So Glaze is a little piece of software written by, and I should get this correct before I mention this. So let's see, Glaze software by the University of Chicago. So what Glaze does is it allows you to save your non AI made artwork through Glaze, and Glaze it does some processing to the image that doesn't change how it looks, but it changes it under the hood in a way where if AI attempts to scrape the artwork, AI will look at it and think that it is an AI generated image, and so it will exclude it from its data set. Because AI, in order for AI to continue to improve, it can't keep eating its own artwork, right?
Yeah,
It'll never improve. So it has to actually have a way for it to know whether it's looking at AI art or not. So
yeah,
Glaze basically tricks it into thinking that it's looking at AI art, but it's actually your art that you've made with your own hard work. And
yeah,
I think that there's something really cool about that. And I think it's worth mentioning that as advanced and crazy as these AI things get, there's going to be the same sort of development and evolution in anti AI tools. I mean, we can look at things like viruses and antiviruses on computers, right? For the
Hmm.
same thing. Like it's so it's not going to be just a one sided thing. So if anybody
No.
is thinking about this and having a sort of dystopian outlook, it's
Yeah.
really important to understand the nuances of this stuff. And I think that that's
Hmm.
kind of what we've highlighted here is that
Yeah.
it's a multi-dimensional conversation.
Absolutely, and invite you to check out the AI panel discussion that's been linked, and check out more of that. But we're going to move on because that is a whole ball of wax that we could talk about uh,
For at least 4 hours, probably.
indefinitely. Yeah. But which trends are actually useful? So we're going to go back a little bit to techniques here. We've got three trends. We're going to talk about photo bashing, 3D mockups, and ZBrush mockups. So just to kind of launch into the photo bashing, it's kind of something that's been happening for a long time where artists will, depending on the project, obviously, usually something that's a little bit more steeped in realism so that you can use photography. Excuse me. Uh, yeah, photo bashing, which is kind of combining and kind of almost like photo collaging and then painting into it, can lessen production time for realistic comps. And so it can be super useful, and you'll see it used in places like at studios like Naughty Dog or WB or Ubisoft, EA, anywhere that's doing more realistic stuff. And there's a lot of stuff out there that requires it. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's a super useful thing to do.
And you can, in terms of just, painting into something, you can take many photos and sort of overlay them and do all kinds of fun blending modes to generate something that you wouldn't normally think to do. So
Hmm.
I often talk to students about the idea of letting the canvas speak back to you. So it's not just this huge burden on you to generate everything, to
Yeah.
preconceive every idea. So when you collage and you let a little bit of chaos happen on the canvas, then, it sort of gives you suggestions, right? And
Hmm.
that's really cool.
Yeah.
And so if you think about photo bashing in that way, I think it starts to feel very creative, and
Yeah.
it's super fun. Like I think my early feelings about photo bashing were quite
It was sort of like
different.
AI, right? It sort of
Yeah,
crept in, and a
yeah,
lot of would-be artists were using it as a way to create art, and good for them. But like there were you would definitely, and you do notice with somebody that is just purely photo bashing and not a painter or somebody that knows how to draw, is it can be constrictive, right? For them to produce things when client wants feedback to or iteration. So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
yeah,
It's a
but
useful technique, and
yeah.
you should definitely understand that there's many different ways to do photo
Mhm.
bashing. So just go out and check out different content, right? Watch people's process
Yeah,
and look at their artwork and see what stuff resonates with you or what matches your
yeah.
project that you're working on. And yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, and I think we'll just move on to the other two. I think we can kind of couple these together. 3D mockups as though, like, say something you've built in Blender. Maybe it's an
Hmm.
environment. It could even be something that's more character based, or ZBrush, which is basically a 3D model, but the process you've kind of sculpted more than you've made it out of primitives or done any sort of, vertex modeling, that kind of thing. So, what I would say about this is those packages provide really easy ways, and we mentioned it before, to add lighting, to see perspective, to lay out a scene, right? And be able to move that around and have control over that even after clients giving you feedback. So those still remain major tools, potential tools in your toolbox as a concept artist.
Absolutely. It's amazing just what you have at your disposal now, how quickly you can visualize. The Blender viewport, you turn on cycles, you enable your GPU, and you've got like realistic lighting
Hmm.
instantly, right? And
Yeah,
you could even go into Unreal 5, right? And then that's even more instant and even more realistic.
yeah, impressive.
It's
Yeah.
amazing stuff. Yeah. So if you're ever thinking about needing reference that you can't find, you can
Hmm.
probably just make it, right? You can probably build it.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Well, I would say, yeah, and that's something that the nice thing about something like Blender, if you couldn't afford ZBrush, right? It has some uh, sculpting utility for sure, and you can find a lot of people making sculpts in Blender. So if you wanted to dip your toe in, you could do that right now, right? You can go download Blender and you can start playing around with it and getting familiar. And so if you were interested in ZBrush, you could always get that and start playing around with that. The point is that they're very useful workflows and worthy of your attention. Of course, they don't replace once again the know-how of the fundamentals of drawing and painting. You want to have a good control of that, and these tools become super powerful for you.
I'll mention
Okay.
one plugin or add-on for Blender that I was
Oh,
recently
yes.
messing with. It's called Sanctus Library, Sanctus. Not affiliated, but it's great because it's just a really quick photorealistic library of materials and textures. So you can just drag and drop them on objects, so you can see, okay, how does leather look, how
Glass.
does
Yeah.
glass, how does, all this stuff, and you can put lights in and observe reflection and refraction, and just again some of these things that you may not be able to visualize in
Hmm.
your mind. You need to have some reference for it. You can build it, and so check that out if you're not wanting to spend time figuring out how to make realistic shaders.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's good. Good point. Okay, the next point we'll look at is upcoming in the industry, and what we focused on here is remote working. More so than technologies or anything like that is remote working, I think, is a question that a lot of people have. Can I get a job if I live in the middle of the forest somewhere? And so what I would say about that is remote working really became clear that it works over COVID lockdowns around the world, right? Where people still made games and film and as concept artists, it's really easy for us to have a little workstation, do work, and send that off to a client over the internet. And so I think before that, there was some people that were really averse to it, but they had to go through this process. So now they know it does work. There are some old guard type people who want to go back to office living, but the problem with that is it's really high overhead. One of the studios I worked at, I found out the power bill per month was $50,000. And
It's
it's
insane.
like that's just the power bill. They were providing us food and all of the rest of the amenities, never mind what they were paying us, right? And so if you can get rid of that, then it's less impact to your bottom line in terms of a production. So those are all positives about that. And it allows you to hire somebody that's not willing to move from, say, I'm here in Vancouver, Canada, and I could hire somebody that's in Spain, right, or Australia, and we wouldn't have to foot the bill to have them move to the office, right? And so those are all the positives. I mean, probably people have a lot of negatives. I mean, one of the things is that you don't get face-to-face contact and that kind of team dynamic, which is a downside, but it's still the expense you have to kind of think about with those things. What are your thoughts on that, Tyler?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in the next topic. We're going to talk about VR and AR, but just to kind of touch on that as it relates to this is if people want that in-person interaction, AR and stuff is getting better, VR is getting better. So this
Mhm.
dream of everybody working remotely but still being able to be like in a room with each other and
Yeah.
feel that experience, I think will get easier over time. But
Yeah.
if you have two studios and one studio is willing to let people work remotely, and the other one isn't, well, then the studio that allows that has access to
More
infinitely more
people.
talent, right?
Yeah.
Like that studio is going to just produce better stuff because they
And they're
have
not going to
better
be
artists
paying,
working for them.
yeah, paying
Yeah.
the price to have a brick and mortar set up. And so,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
And I think I want to jump in there because I think we're going to talk about VR, AR as new and innovative tools. But in terms of seeing people, see the new Vision Pro from Apple apparently has a really convincing, not that you want to be wearing VR in your head all the time, but really convincing FaceTime. And I believe it's Google, and I could be wrong. It might be Samsung, maybe it's Google, but they have that panel where you can look at it and it looks like the person sitting on the other side of that panel.
Yeah.
And that's new, and it's obviously really big, bulky, probably exorbitantly expensive, but the technology is there. So over time, this may actually be a situation where your TV becomes this meeting room app that looks three-dimensional in an augmented reality way, where we actually start kind of feeling like the person's there. And so maybe that erodes that benefit for the people that are stuck in the offices. And it
Yeah,
really
I
does
think it's
help.
just the in-person thing. It's such a small piece, and then
Hmm.
when you look at the benefits of remote, it's such a huge. It's like the
Yeah,
comparison
exactly.
is just night and day, and you get reduced real estate, and you get reduced
Hmm.
travel time, and just carbon emission. I mean, you just get a ton of things, right? And
Yeah,
it's a
absolutely.
no-brainer, I think, in many ways. And then, yeah, just some of the old guard, they still sort of just holding on to this idea that I can, be like, sitting at a table across from somebody, and I
Yeah.
get that's cool, but yeah, at what cost are
Yeah,
you holding on
exactly.
to, you know, all of these other downsides just for that
Antiquated.
one
Yeah.
aspect? It's a little silly, honestly. So yeah, I mean,
Yep.
as you mentioned with VR and AR, it's getting better. I mean, sure, it's heavy, it's maybe not as comfortable right now, but as we know with technology, that stuff just gets better, right?
Yeah.
Batteries get more efficient and cameras get lighter and
Hmm.
screens get brighter, and it just all of that stuff improves over time. So eventually, we'll have a VR headset that's like regular sunglasses, right?
Hmm.
And it'll just be amazing. I can't wait for that.
Well, I think that, yeah, that's a great point. We're going to talk about new and innovative tools, the AR, VR. I think that's what we've been just talking about, right? And so those are possibilities for the future. And we've even talked about Unreal Engine being kind of a future tech that helps people visualize things really quickly, certainly in visualization and virtual production, which we also offer at the school. But you wanted to talk particularly about the VR, AR in terms of Gravity Sketch.
Right. Yeah, I wanted to mention Gravity Sketch here because it's a really cool piece of software that it's been around for a few years now, but I don't know that it has enough traction. I just want to kind of highlight it. It's super cool because what it lets you do is obviously when you're in VR, you'll typically have your little controllers, and it's aware of the depth and everything of your hands. And in Gravity Sketch, as you're moving around in the space, you're sculpting in a three-dimensional world, right? And your hand position is tracked. So it offers this incredibly realistic, immersive way to interact with your digital sculpture, unlike anything that ZBrush can do.
Hmm.
And I remember seeing a video of somebody designing a vehicle, and they were designing it. Part of it was designing it while they were in the cockpit of the vehicle, so they could literally consider how it felt to be a human sized person in this physical space, and the accuracy of that, the nuance that you can bring to that design
Hmm.
by being able to exist in that space is
Hmm.
amazing. And I think that as the hardware gets better, cheaper, all of that stuff, tools like Gravity Sketch will really start to become more, I think, used overall.
Yeah, and I mean, even one of the rookies competition finalists built a little dragon, and I think it might. I'm not sure if it was Gravity Sketch, but you can tell it was sort of that layered sort of VR quality, and that can also be a way to visualize. Like you could physically sculpt a rough shape, pick the right angle to screenshot it and then go in and paint, right? And so it projecting out into the future, as you said, everything gets better. That can start to be something where you maybe have a grease pencil, which is a thing where you can in Blender draw in 3D space lines. But maybe that starts to become more a part of that process where you can be drawing things in a physical space, moving your camera around till they work best for you, and then go from there in 2D. So yeah, it's great to highlight that kind of thing. There's always new stuff coming down the pipe.
I think the key is to
So
just invest in yourself, right? Like some of these
yes.
things will come and go. try to latch on to your foundational skills that
Yeah,
will be applicable across the whole spectrum. It's like
yeah,
if you were good at designing and um, you're able to think about convincing volumes. All that stuff is going to be helpful for you, whether you're in Photoshop or you're in ZBrush or whatever you're in,
or
right? Like
Gravity
those.
Sketch. Yeah, you got to
Yeah,
know the fundamentals. Otherwise, you run into the problem we were talking about the AI prompter, is they won't know what's good or what's bad or how to change things or be able to, right?
yeah, yeah. Just
Um,
invest in skills that have
yeah,
a broader, application and will serve you through various fads. And that's
yeah,
something that the school obviously focuses on. We have a real interest in providing skills that are not just a one-off random thing, right? It's
yeah.
like, here's something that we
Principles.
know is going to be valuable
Yeah,
across the spectrum, a CG
yeah.
spectrum. Hey,
Hey. Okay. On that note, we're gonna wrap it up. We're a little bit over time, but yeah, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. Any questions, you can pop them in the webinar chat. Let me just take a look to see if there's any. But
yeah, I didn't see
if,
anything pop up, so I think we might be good on that front. But
yeah.
obviously, this will be uploaded to YouTube later, so you can drop some comments. We highly encourage you guys to follow us here on YouTube and subscribe, do all that cool stuff. You know the deal,
Smash,
and
smash those
smash the like
buttons.
button. Oh God, I
Yeah.
feel I feel like a content creator. What's going on?
Yeah, we got to do the surprise face
Yeah, we
for
need
the
a good
thumbnail.
thumbnail. I'll try to look super surprised about something.
Yeah,
But yeah, leave some comments, leave questions, obviously, and we've got some awesome people working with the school who can keep an eye on that stuff for you guys.
excellent. Okay, thanks, and
Yeah,
we'll see you around.
good luck, everybody. See ya.